All right, so today in compositing, we're going to be talking about, big shock, compositing, which is kind of just the basis of the things we're going to be doing in this class. Compositing really just means to combine things that otherwise weren't together. And sadly, this dancer and Wolfie were not in this club the same night. In fact, they weren't in the club at all, which you could probably tell, but this is a really quick example of removing the backgrounds of the two pieces of footage I have here, Wolfie and this dancer, and then putting them in a background or using them for other applications, like way back when they released the iTunes app, they had this dancing guy. Let me lower the resolution here. My RAM preview is a little bit slow. That happens, day after a long holiday. But here I have that same dancer footage just with a fill applied and repeated 3 times to kind of create that more illustrative look. So you can use it to combine things, but you can also just use it for different artistic and graphic design purposes. With compositing, it's really just removing something from something else, usually a subject from a background. And if there's not a green or blue screen, we have to rotoscope or trace it frame by frame, which is complicated in its own way, but we'll actually talk about techniques of how to do that in the upcoming weeks. But ideally, if you know you're going to combine a shot, you would want to plan ahead and shoot against a green or blue screen, and then you could key out that green or blue and then get an alpha channel in order to drop your person into a different background or even combine multiple people. So I wanted to talk about just the basics of removing that background. And so I have my dancer clip here, and he's actually already keyed. So let me just start with the original footage. And here you can see he's just busting a little move here. This is a clip that I edited down. But there's some quicker movements, which creates a motion blur that could be problematic. Also, his shoes are kind of a light blue, which is closer to green than the background, so we'll have to do some adjustments to get that coloring out. But I thought this would be a good example of just basic compositing. So the first thing we want to do is remove as much of the background as we can. And clearly, since it's not all green, keying's not going to work. So masking's really the first thing we want to do, because we can isolate the subject and what we want to cut out. And depending on how detailed your mask is, that would be the difference of just masking or rotoscoping. So I could use my pen tool, and with my footage selected, I can just kind of draw a really basic shape around my character. And I'd want to make sure I stay within the boundaries of where they're moving. So like right there, I probably want to add another point or just move the whole thing over, and then just kind of continue around with my pen tool. And once I close my path, it's going to hide everything outside of it. We can invert that, which clearly isn't what we want. I don't like to do inverted though, because typically we have to use more than one mask, and inverted isn't going to work with other masks the way we want it to. The masks in After Effects basically work like the Pathfinder tool in Illustrator, where when you have more than one mask, you could choose what the interaction between those masks is. So add is the default, so it's going to add onto that. But if I set this other mask to subtract, it's going to take that chunk out of it. Or if I choose intersect, it's just going to keep the overlap. So those same skills you learn in Illustrator with the Pathfinder tool and how paths interact is the same way masks do, since they are path-based. So I'm just going to remove that other one. And if we wanted to animate this over time, we could. You can animate a mask just like you would animate anything else. If I animate the mask path, like if his hand extended out this way and we couldn't accommodate it normally, we can animate that point moving out. And then if we had gone around really detailed frame by frame, that would be rotoscoping. So rotoscoping is your masking frame by frame to the line of the object. This is really just creating what's called a garbage mat. You're just getting rid of everything outside of the keyed in area that you don't need. because then it's going to make it that much easier to key it out because the gray and everything else isn't going to work. So I'm just going to delete those points. In fact, I'll just click the stopwatch to remove animation, but let's do that before it tweens out. And so if I scrub through my footage here, there isn't any point where his limbs move outside. Oh, I take that back. Right there, his fingers kind of mark the edge. So I don't need another point. I'm just going to go in with my direct select tool. And I don't want to go too far because then I have those little clips. But it seems like right there, we should be fine, but we can also adjust this mask at any time during. Now, another big consideration is the lighting, and this wasn't set up as a shoot, so this was just kind of what was there. But you want a really distinct light between your background and your subject. A lot of shadows are going to be hard to key, and you can keep those shadows if they're really defined, but I'd recommend just recreating them. You're going to have more control over them later. In this very silly example, I added the footage of the dancer. I kind of reversed it. I filled it with black and blurred it to kind of replicate a shadow quickly. So it's kind of like doing screen replacement. You can shoot the thing that's there, but sometimes recreating it gives you more control. This I'd make darker and make it match the existing clues in the image, which is a big part of compositing as well, is just making your subject match the background. But before then, let's get this subject isolated. So we have our garbage mat. That looks pretty good. And I'm just going to collapse the mask options for now. The main thing I want to do is apply keying. And keying has its own category within Effect. So if I go Effect, Keying, with the footage selected, I have quite a few options here. But the main one we're going to use is called Keylight 1.2. The 1.2 is just the version of this effect. It really doesn't mean anything as far as what it does. And so we can extract, which is just black and white. We can select a color range. We'll talk about some of these later, but the main tool you're going to be using for compositing is Keylight. And Effect Keying Keylight gives you some options here under your effect controls. And essentially what you're going to do is sample the color you want to get rid of and then adjust kind of like the levels to determine what part of that color is being removed. Is it the midtones, highlights, or shadows? So view, we have a few options in here. Final, we can see the final result, the source. We're going to be looking at the screen mat in just a moment, which is the black and white version. But before then, let's just talk about this color. So this could be green or blue. This could be any color. It's green or blue because we don't usually have that color in our skin. Obviously, if it was the Blue Man Group, you wouldn't want to shoot them against a blue screen because then you would lose them too. So you want difference between your subject and background. And the more contrast there is, the easier it is to remove. So I'm just going to click where it says Screen Color. I'm going to click on my little eyedrop tool. And there is some fluctuation here because of the shadows. I'm going to click on what I consider kind of a medium green. And even without doing anything else, if we zoom in a little here and scrub through, you can see it actually got rid of most of the green. The only thing that's really there still is the shadows that were there. So with lighting, we can make those more intense or go away entirely. Now, what it's really removing, so you can see the transparency because we have this alpha channel on. If I was to go into my project and just add, I know we all want to be on campus, so I'm going to scale up this background. And you can see against the background or transparency that he's partially transparent too. You can actually see through his leg, and then you can see how his shadow affects the things below it. So you definitely can tell it's not totally clear, but I like to work without the background at first because then you can see what's going in and what's not. Another thing that's helpful is doing the opposite of the green. Like you can see the transparency grid in his pants here, but if I go layer new solid and add a bright red solid, which is the opposite of green, and put that underneath everything else, then we'll really see what's coming through and what's not, because you can see the red shining through his pants and shoes. So we want our subject to be totally opaque. So in order to adjust that, we're going to go back to our dancer layer and back to our Effect Controls tab. And I don't think we need to adjust the color. The final result is showing us what it looks like when keyed. We can go back to source at any time to see the original footage. And then with the mask, you could just turn a mask off. So if you wanted to just see the original again, you could turn the mask to none and turn the view to source and you would see that. Or you could just double click on the footage, or show your background. Or you could double click on the footage within the project window, and that will open up the footage in just the view mode, and that will also show you the source material. So some people panic. Remember, everything in After Effects is non-destructive. It has a lot of Photoshop options, but those are non-destructive. So if I go back to our current dancer file here, I'm going to turn the mask back to add, and I'm going to turn my effect controls to final result. So we can see there's some translucency we don't want, but even a better way of seeing it versus a red background or the background that we want is looking at screen matte. So before that, we can adjust the success of this by changing the settings of screen gain and screen balance. So if I adjust that, you could see if I increase the screen gain, I actually do get rid of a lot of those shadows, but I eat into his shoes some more. So it is helping, but it's making some things more transparent. And I can change the screen balance, but I can see that's really finicky too. I really don't mess with screen color or screen gain that much. And there's lots of options in here. My formula for this is normally do a garbage mask, do a basic keying of that color, kind of check how successful it is. But then if you go to this middle setting, screen matte, it's going to show you the black and white of your current key. And the path is very Illustrator-like with the mask. This is very much a Photoshop mask, where white reveals and black hides. So if you think about masking in Photoshop, white within a mask shows you those pixels, black hides those pixels, and then anything in between does the in-between of the transparency. I said that and my hands are going in and out of existence. Also, I can see that there's that one little clip right here that I'm going to just fix. So as I scrub through, I can definitely see where the transparency is. So I can fix that with screen gain and balance and get a better idea of what it's doing. But I can see that neither one of them is really giving me, it's like it sacrifices one thing for the other. I'm going to undo those, and instead I'm going to look at screen matte and then twirl down my screen matte options. And if I twirl down my screen matte options, I can adjust the black and white within it. So this is kind of like levels adjustment. I can choose clip black, and that's going to choose what level the black actually cuts off. So obviously I don't really want to change that. What I want to do is clip white. And if I bring the white to the left, I can, there's not a magic formula for numbers here. It's going to totally depend on the content, the lighting, everything else. But if I decrease clip white here, I can get my subject to be a really solid white and the background to be a really solid black, which means that we have a totally transparent background. Now that's just that frame. So you do want to scrub through and make sure that works throughout. And there are going to be issues with motion blurs and things like that, and we can adjust screen softness and give it kind of a feathered edge, which can help with Wolfie. We're definitely going to want a feathered edge because he has nice soft fur. And it's actually not that soft. It's kind of creepy if you've ever been near the mascot, but let's pretend it's soft. And if we play this back, let's go back to our final result. And if we play this back, we can see we're really not having any transparency issues. And we're able to see his legs fully and his shoes. I think he might have a tiny spot right there where his shoes are transparent. If we go back to screen matte See, that's interesting because it doesn't show up as black right there. So I'm not sure where that little red chunk is coming from, unless it's actually on his shoe. So I'm going to go back to fit. I'm going to go to final result. And let's turn this background back on. Clearly we need to bring this down. Let's scale it up a little bit. Just going to click S for scale. One of my favorite shortcuts in After Effects is you have these 5 properties that you can change about something: position, anchor point, scale, rotation, and opacity. You could always twirl down those options and go to them individually, but After Effects, like all Adobe programs, has a whole lot of shortcuts. And so if I do P, I bring up just position, A just brings up anchor point, R does rotation, T does opacity, and then S does scale. So I remember them as the parts of animation. You know, if you've worked in After Effects a while, that your vertical screen space is just as valuable as the stage itself. When you have a lot of layers with different effects, the timeline gets really lengthy. So there's a couple of techniques we can use to make that more clear, but one of them is just bringing up the things you want to animate. So PARTS will cycle through those different things. And if I wanted to do scale and position, if I throw a shift in there, it'll do that plus the other thing I choose. So now I've got position and scale rather than just swapping one. Of course, you could just twirl things down too, but I find the shortcuts to actually really help. So for him, I'm going to click S for scale and scale him down. And so he's going to be, usually when I'm compositing to make something look real, I really try to get clues from the scene itself, like the lighting, the scale itself, the placement. I'm going to scale him down to like the size of this person. Clay's pretty tall. And so he's just going to be awkwardly dancing here while this person's like trying to go to class. And he's like, hey, you see these new kicks I got? Yeah. Or, you know, better yet, we could put him up on this little thing. So he's just, I think he's too large now. And he takes a step forward, but you get the idea. Now, the follow-up to this would actually be going in and making sure his coloring matches, giving him a shadow. Obviously, like I mentioned, the scale and position. But we have a basic key here that works pretty well, and we could really put him into any background. And of course, we can go in and finesse those edges more. But when we're talking about edge finessing, we should probably get this guy in here. So this is our somewhat terrifying mascot. This was some footage I shot a while ago because I helped with the centennial of the college when we turned 100. This was a student that wanted to dance in the Wolfie costume, and I couldn't use any of this footage for the centennial, but it's really funny. And I apologize because this is like a 30-second clip. You can obviously trim it down to whatever you want. It's hard to choose what part to use just because of how cool his moves are. I should have had this pre-RAM previewed, but I'm just going to grab a little chunk here. I like this shoulder dust off move. So I'm just going to bring in my work area. And let's just get like a 10-second. We'll include the spank for no reason. Oh, because his hand actually goes outside, and that's a great time to talk about rotoscoping, or just saving that little bit. So I'm going to trim this down. I'm just going to go composition, trim comp to work area. And that should give us an easier time of RAM previewing this. So with Wolfie, same concept. We've got this subject in front of a green screen. We want to remove him from the background. The lighting's better, but because of the lighting, we also have 2 cross shadows here. So that's going to be something to consider. And then this character has some fluff to it. So the edge quality is a big part of it. Just like my hair is getting mutilated by this instant background thing, we have to be really careful that hair in particular is not cut off abruptly. So this is the same concept in Photoshop when you do a composite, when you mask something into something else. So here's that footage. It's supposed to be in real time, but my computer is older and slower, which I can relate to. So I have this already RAM previewed one here, so you can see him in all of his dancing glory. So here's a clip that I already cleaned up of both of them. And like I said, this one also has an adjustment layer to add. They actually have quite a few adjustment layers on both of them, like the photo filter to really make it match the background more. But like I said, this is pretty minor in comparison to some of the stuff we're going to be covering this semester. So if I go to Wolfie here, let's do our garbage mat first. So I'm just going to grab my pen tool. By the way, if I don't do a garbage mat and I just jump right to keying, you can do that. Let's go keying, key light 1.2, grab our eyedropper, click on the green. So it removes the green screen, but it only removes the green screen because it only removes that color. So that's not extremely helpful. That's why we use the garbage mat. And if you want to do that first, that's fine because it gives you a good idea of where it's at. But the garbage mat is really everything that won't be taken out by that keying. So I'm just going to undo. And with my pen tool, since he moves quite a bit, I'm actually just going to go along pretty much the edge of the green screen. I know I don't want that sandbag there. And I'm just going to move around here. And I know we're going to have a problem up here by his hand. But rather than animating this main garbage mask, I'm just going to add another mask for that moment. So I'm just going to go in like I would in Illustrator and remove some points here. And that looks all right. Oh, and then there's this whole little bit over here. We can actually move this over quite a bit. Okay, so now if I go in and do keying, not confusing at all, but effect keying, key light, and then eyedropper on the green. I'm going for a middle green. If I go for like the darker one, it works, but it's going to, I like to go for a mid-range and then kind of adjust. So I'm just going to use my eyedropper and click. We can see that there's quite a few shadows still, whether we're looking at the transparency grid, whether we add a background color, or I usually just jump right to screen matte. And then that really gives me an idea of what's transparent and what's not. So if I choose screen matte, I can twirl down my screen matte options. I want to clip black and clip white until my subject is totally white. Remember, that's just for one frame. So if you scrub through, if something were to change, like if there was a big lighting shift, that would definitely be difficult to continue keying, but you can animate any of these settings. So if you needed to change the way something clips or the expanse of something or the feather of something, you totally could. So obviously if there's a lot of change, we can animate that change. That looks pretty good, but like I mentioned, he does have a lot of fur. So if we go back to final result, and we're still getting a little bit of movement right here, a little bit of flickering, but with something like that, I could just continue to adjust the garbage mat. If it's not near the subject, I might just consider removing that through a mask. I'm really just concerned about the background in general. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to grab that red solid, not that I can't just make another one, but let's copy and paste that into here. And looking against a really, let's go back to just full resolution. We can see that there is some edge softness, but like with something like this, when there's a lot of motion blur, that's too hard of an edge. If we go back to the clip and go back to just source, we can see that there's a lot of like finger fur. It's definitely the first time I've said that in a lecture. There's a lot of finger fur here that we still need to take into consideration. Same thing with the shoulder here. So if we go back from source to final result, we can see we're losing some of that detail. So under clip black and clip white, I can try to adjust those things. In this case, you can also do screen shrink and grow, which will kind of expand the threshold. I want to actually just change the screen softness, and I could just kind of increase the softness of that edge. I don't want to go too much all the way around because things like the top hat wouldn't have that. But then if I go back to my original, I can go back and forth there. I think this is a little too much. But we can adjust that here. And then we'll talk about some of these other options in upcoming classes, but like edge correction specifically, like if there was a lot of spill going on, which there's not, lighting's a big consideration, not just because of the shadows, but also is the light bouncing up on your subject. So if there was a lot of spill from this character from the background, we'd get a lot of green on the paws or anything that's reflective, and that would require just treatment on its own. So if we play this back, that's looking pretty good masking-wise and keying-wise. So I can put in a different background. Let's put him in the party time one here. And remove our solid. And you could use any background for this. I just thought this is kind of like, you know, a good balance between school and partying, you know, or somewhere in between. And you could put either one. I like Wolfie more in the party scene. I think he fits in better here, especially with the top hat. He has a little bit of a shadow down here, but that actually isn't so bad. I would probably go in and replicate that myself. For this situation, even just having kind of an undershadow below him would help. Like, even if I just made a new solid, I'm just going to sample this floor color. I'm going to grab my oval tool and just do... So like you could replicate the footage like I did with the dancer earlier, or you could even just add dimension by changing something like that and then blurring it. But like I said, we're going to be getting into way more options throughout the semester. This is really just to give you an idea of the different things that you can do and just get started on some of these techniques. So if I add like a feather here, super subtle, but you can see that that adds that much more depth since wherever he is, there's a big light spot underneath him. So even just little considerations like that, that fills in that little tail shadow that was still there. But now he has more presence in the scene. Oh, and then this was the main thing that I wanted to take care of. So this, you can obviously see his paws going outside of the boundary. And so, oh, and here comes my cat Fig. He's like, oh, you're working with long fur? I got some long fur for you. So we can adjust our mask, but if we adjust our mask, we're going to get some of the background in there. So for this situation, I would actually do a second mask that we'd really just use for this paw. So if I select our character here, we're going to turn this mask off. So if we turn this to none, we could see what we're missing here, but also what it's intersecting. So we can't really fix that by keying. So I'm just going to use my pen tool on this layer. And let's zoom in a little bit here. So these are obviously the kinds of things that on set you would want to watch for and monitor. But if something happens, we can fix it. So for this, I'm going to go a little bit more detailed with my mask. And you could see that since this one's set to none, we're just getting the hand. I'll turn that one back to add because we do want to include both. So this mask, we're going to animate the position of it, but we can also change the feather. So if I increase the feather of this a little bit, we can see if we increase the points a little, in addition to feathering it, we can also expand it. So even if you get kind of just a general selection, you could really go in and finesse it still. Now, obviously, that's going to change on the frames before and after it. So I'm just going to click on the mask path stopwatch to place a frame. And if I use page up and page down, I can go through a frame at a time. And rather than redraw each point, which I certainly could do, I'm just going to move forward a few frames and then move that whole path. And then just kind of go in and adjust as needed. So rather than drawing the whole thing frame by frame, I'm going to get some of that tweening in there. And then so for here, same thing. I'm just going to select the whole thing and kind of have it follow. We really don't need that kind of finger shape there, especially because we're seeing the edge as we do that. So we're just going to bring that in some more. So it's not just changing the position, we're actually changing where those points are. That looks pretty good. And then at this point, we want that mask to be totally gone. So if we just bring it within the other mask, you won't see it at all anyways, because it's just encompassed by that one. So if we bring that out, and then same thing, we would just need to do this a little bit more. So this is a little taste of rotoscoping. You could see it doesn't taste that good. This is why when they say fix it in post, this is the kind of thing they mean. Like, oops, there's this thing that we didn't see on set. How can we take care of it after the fact? The less you have to fix in post, the better, obviously. But almost everything can be fixed afterwards. So you can see we've got a pretty good hand movement there. I saw one little weird thing when that finger shape was still out. That's why page up and page down are so helpful. I'm just going to move those in a little bit more. And now if we watch, oh, I didn't realize it goes out up there too. Wolfie. That's okay. We got this one coming in. That looks good. But then right here, we can reuse the same mask. That's not a problem. We'll just go in and make sure that is encompassed. So there we've got a pretty decent mask. And if we zoom back out, it should just fit this in the screen. And just kind of RAM preview that little bit. We can see that apparently it happens before, and I already saw that. But hopefully you get the idea. I'm just going to move this over too. So there really wouldn't be a good way of doing that by keying, but by animating a mask, whether it's a really basic garbage mask or something more rotoscoping, you can get more finesse with your composites. And then this guy will just move back here, just so it's kind of in the same position. Now there's some unnecessary movement in there, but it should be covered now as it goes outside of that initial mask. There we go. So through a combination of things, through keying, garbage mats, and additional masking, in this case rotoscoping, which just means that we're going around something frame by frame, or one of the best things about these programs is that they tween. Things like Star Wars, when they did compositing, they did have to do frame by frame, literally, because it was film. But tweening is really one of the best things that these software programs provide. So you can certainly do things frame by frame, but if you can have it tween between different main points, that also will serve you really well. So the exercise here is just to key out one of these characters. If you do both, that's awesome. I do think that they are both good challenges just because you've got movement with one and then colors that are kind of similar. And then you've got the soft edges with Wolfie. If you have existing keyed or non-keyed footage, rather, if you have green screen footage, you can use that as well. But these are just two really easy clips that are really just about practicing. You don't need to use the backgrounds, but don't overthink it. It's really just something to practice with. And this is something that we'll just keep building on. The next class, we'll talk about ways of adjusting this to look more like it fits the scene. But then we're going to go to outer space in the next class, where we'll talk about doing the same kind of technique, but if we have a tracking shot with like a model or a ship, how do we remove the green screen, but then also remove things like the rods or strings or whatever else is holding that thing in place. So we'll just keep building off of the skill set. Unfortunately, there won't be any more dance parties like this, but that doesn't mean we can't make one. Anything is possible with compositing. I feel like that's probably I can't think of something better to end it with than that unless there's questions.